One of the key social constructions of difference in our society, one of the more meaningful socially constructed categories of difference is gender. We divide a lot of our society on this binary notion of gender. You're either male or female, masculine or feminine, and we really conflate. So the meaning we often confuse gender, which is masculine characteristics or feminine characteristics, with biological sex, which would be male or female. And in our society, we're taught that these are supposed to align, right? Like boys are masculine, girls are feminine, right? And this is supposed to align. And then it also sort of aligns with, or we were taught that it's supposed to align with, and it really doesn't, with sexuality, right? That this idea that boys are masculine and they should be attracted to girls, and girls are feminine and they should be attracted to boys, like, and that this all sort of lines up in these neat binary categories. And that's really how, what we've been taught about gender. And it's not true, right? Gender is fluid. Sexuality is fluid. We now have spaces for trans identities, right? And gender fluid identities, and it's great to see. So that being said, it's still a major socially constructed difference, and critical intercultural scholars argue that gender is a social construction. So gender is socially meaningful, and we're taught from a young age how to be men and women, right? And I do this experiment in class where I have all the men and women stand up in the classroom, and I say, okay, like pick up your books or pick up a bag, pick up your backpack. And I say, freeze. And then we say, okay, notice how the guys in the classroom are standing, and notice how the women in the classroom are standing. And we start to notice like little differences, like oftentimes the women in the classroom will sort of like lean to one side, not all the time, and guys are kind of like they'll slouch, and often women will hold their bag in front of them, or they'll kind of like hug their books or hold their books in front of their bodies, and guys will have like their backpack to the side or their books down in their hands by their sides, and you notice these differences. And then we say, okay, stop, freeze. Okay, now I want you to perform the opposite gender. And for the last few minutes of class, we have the men in the classroom holding their books, moving their bodies like women, and the women in the classroom holding their books and moving their bodies like guys. And it's really fascinating to see women, so I say, go back to your seats and keep performing the opposite gender. To see women sit in the chair like men is really, really powerful, because it unpacks how we've been taught to move our bodies, right? And if gender was all simply nature, like some people want to argue, then you wouldn't have to teach it. You wouldn't need social reinforcement that boys don't cry. You wouldn't need social reinforcement that girls aren't supposed to sit this way, and guys aren't supposed to move their bodies this way. And so, really see the ways that gender is socially constructed. And gender is socially constructed also because the meaning of being a man and the meaning of being a woman changes in culture, right? In some cultures, it's totally appropriate for two men to hold hands, right? And in other cultures, that's totally inappropriate, right? And so it's another example of how gender is socially constructed. Also, so here we go, communicative acts determined by the sex you're given at birth. So this idea that you're assigned a sex right away at birth, right? So the first question, a baby's born, and right away, what's the first question we ask? We ask, what is it, right? And it's interesting that we're an it until we're actually assigned a gender. That in some ways, we don't really become a person in our society until you're assigned some sort of sex identity, right? Which we then conflate with gender identity. So we're like, okay, if it quote unquote has a penis, then it is male, and if it has a vagina, then it's female. And then you say, okay, this is a boy, this is a girl, and then how we go about treating that child based on gender is different, right? So right away, like the colors of the blankets that they give boy babies versus girl babies is different, like blue or pink. The little booties that they put on their feet are blue or pink. And they've done studies of how nurses interact differently with boy babies versus girl babies. So nurses will smile more uh, with girl babies and hold them closer and all this sort of stuff. And then with boy babies, they interact differently based on the gender of the baby. So right away, we're taught and we're interacted with differently based on our gender. And this idea that, yeah, gender and sex are the same thing, that in this binary system of gender, you're either male or female, and that so gender is the traits masculine and feminine, and sex is your the biological sex category, and that they're the same thing, right? When they're actually really, really different. So you could be biologically male, right? And on the continuum, be more feminine, right? And then you could be biologically female, and on the continuum, be more masculine, right? And that also the assumption that these correlate to some sort of sexuality, right, is also not true. So there's a kind of like heteronormativity that undergirds this, or an idea that males are masculine and desire females, right? And then the females are feminine and desire males, right? And it's not always true, right? And it's great to see society sort of advance with these, right? Or we've come a long way, and there's still a long way to go. But it's good to see that be unpacked and allowing spaces for all sorts of new identities to emerge, like what gender nonconforming, trans identities, whether it be transgender or transsexual identities, and all the continuum of sexualities that we now see, from gay, straight, questioning, pansexual identities. So it's good to see this. And there's actually something called, I forgot what it's actually called. It's called like the genderbread man, which is a play on the gingerbread man, and it kind of breaks down the difference between sexuality and gender and sex and assigned sex and all these different things. And so I'll be posting that as well. But yeah, one of the key socially constructed differences in our society is, of course, gender.